And you're out somewhere in the general area that Tony lives in, is that right, Tony Hillerman?
I'm in the, I'm actually in the county. I'm in an unincorporated area, but I'm right outside of the city limits. And Tony lives in this village called the Los Ranchos. And there are all these small villages. There's Los Ranchos, Alameda, Corrales, that right along the river, and the city's kind of swallowing them up. But Los Ranchos has made a strong attempt to preserve its identity as a village, you know, not get eaten up by Albuquerque. And what happens in that kind of situation usually is that these areas are desirable and they just become more and more expensive. And there are all these irrigation ditches that wander around the valley that have gone back to the Indians, and then the Spanish settlers used them, and that was farming land. And so there's a ditch and then a trail. The Los Ranchos is on the west side of the ditch, and then there's a trailer on the east side, and then my house. So I like to say I'm at one trailer away from being in the village of Los Ranchos. And the significance of that is they have very strong zoning, and the area that I live in doesn't, because it's this unincorporated area. It's a more of a mixed, in terms of people's income. Los Ranchos is getting very expensive.
A strong writers community, since you do have so many good writers?
Do
you all get together and do whatever writers do when they get together?
Talk,
is that it?
We had, Tony Hillerman actually started this group called First Friday, way back when. And on the first Friday of every month, writers would get together and just talk about what we're doing and get mad at our publishers and so forth. And it was only for published writers. And then the group's been going on for a while, and we met at this particular place, and it was one big table, and it was sort of hard to talk to anybody but the person who was right next to you. And the group really dwindled. People really stopped coming. And then Dwight Myers, who was the sales rep for Simon & Schuster, retired, and he went to work part-time for Page One. He got the idea that Page One would offer us a free lunch the first Friday of every month. And then it's amazing what writers would do for free lunch, but everybody that you hadn't seen for years started turning out. And Tony started coming again, and Norm Zollinger, and Jake Page, and a lot of wonderful people. So it's a really good group now.
That sounds like it would be a lot of fun. I've heard, you know, every once in a while Walter Satterthwaite makes one of his
comes occasionally.
Pixie-like appearances here in Scottsdale. In fact, he's scheduled for one in November with what he claims may be the last Joshua Croft book, which upset me considerably because I love them. And that's, as you know, a PI series set in Santa Fe. But he's given me some reports about some of the First Fridays, and they have sounded wonderful. And you told me just before we started this conversation today that Tony has written a new book, which I'm sure his many fans will be thrilled to hear.
It's a Leaphorn and Chee.
It's another Leaphorn and Chee mystery?
Scheduled for spring.
Well, when you came in February of 1995 to our mystery convention in Scottsdale, you came in the role of Toastmaster, and Tony was the guest of honor. And it was a marvelous interview that you and Tony did together.
Tony's very easy to interview.
He is. He loves to talk, doesn't he? It's marvelous.
And he's very entertaining. I asked somebody at Harper what would be some good questions, and it probably was Carolyn, actually, and she said, well, you know, he loves to talk about, he collects these crazy crimes, really weird crimes where everything went wrong kind of thing, and just ask him about those. And it's like starting the ball rolling. He just went on and on and on with us. And Tony's very absent-minded. It's been reputed he has trouble remembering his wife's name. But then when it comes to these crimes, he remembers everying. He's got an incredible memory for them.
Well, you did such a wonderful job as the Toastmaster
that
I had, well, and thank you, because it was the highlight of the conference. But I had wondered, you know, if your association over time with him in Albuquerque obviously allowed you to know him in a way that writers sometimes don't know colleagues. You know, you were so at ease with him, but you knew so much about him. And I
don't know, because I haven't really spent a lot of time with him, and he's been very kind, as he is to all New Mexico writers. I mean, the thing about Tony and I is we have the same editor, same publisher, the same jacket artist, so there, you know, I hear a lot about him through my editor. I'm very aware of what he's doing. But after the last First Friday, we were kind of lingering afterwards, and we started talking about our writing schedules and our favorite writers, and that was the first time I'd ever really had a conversation about the particulars of writing with him. And it was very interesting because he writes at night, and I write first thing in the morning. I have to get started immediately as soon as I have my coffee and before I talk to anybody or do anything else or even get dressed. But he works very late at night. I don't know when he starts, but he'll work until like 2:30 in the morning. But that's probably the only time he can find some peace and quiet.
Well, that could be, or it may also be a leftover from the fact that he did his writing when he was also a full-time journalist. And, you know, people have full-time jobs, either do it at 5 in the morning or tend to do it late at night, depending on when they're awake. You know, I'm a late at night writer. I do my best because nobody can call me up or
Well,
talk
I'm sure
to me.
that's true in his case, too.
Yeah, I would think
Yeah.
so. But you did bring up a point which I was going to ask you about, which is artwork for your books, because anyone who has seen Hillerman's books can tell that there has to be.
Is that really
yeah,
obvious?
there's a thread. You do have the same publisher. Do you actually have the same jacket cover artist?
Yes, we do. Peter Thorpe.
And
And sometimes I have to kind of lean on them a little bit because this book, for example, yes, you know, he's done so many books for Tony, and he's certainly familiar with the Indian symbols. And so this book has Kachina mask on it, but yet has absolutely nothing to do with Indians. So I do get into Indian life in some other books, but not in this one. And so also I was a little anxious. The pumpkin is because the murder took place on Halloween, so that was legitimate to jack-o'-lantern. But I was a little concerned about the Kachina masks as to maybe they were sacred or something, and I asked my editor, and he ran it by Tony, and he said he didn't think so. That, you know, there wasn't anything here that couldn't be reproduced. And I took it to the Indian Cultural Pueblo Center and asked them, and they said there was no problem. And then in this book,
that's the one about the real estate in Phoenix,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
So
and you certainly wouldn't get that from the jacket, would you?
no, not at all.
Yeah, it's a very striking and colorful jacket, but I don't think it really reveals what the book is about. This one I showed to Tony at Hot Shots, and I was a little concerned that people wouldn't realize from the title that Hot Shots were firefighters. But of course, after we had so many fires this spring, I think everybody, certainly Southwest, understands that. But I showed it to Tony, and he said, Hot Shots, he said, they used to call oil drillers in the Texas Hot Shots.
Did they really?
Yeah, and I said, no, Tony, actually it's a book about firefighting, you know, why is there a skull on it? I don't know. But if you look back here, there's a little bit of fire.
Right.
Right there. And he looked at that and he said, it's the first fire I ever saw that didn't have any smoke.
Well, I have wondered if you thought that Harper, because of Tony's huge success, you know, was packaging your books in any way to pick up on that, or just because they don't know what else to do with the Southwest theme, or do you have any thoughts about?
I don't know.
I mean, not that I think that there's anything wrong with either.
Yeah. But what's interesting, and maybe you probably know more about this than I do, Tony has the same cover on hardcover and softcover, and I don't. Is that common? I mean, it seems to me more common that they use different covers, and I'm not quite sure why.
It is, but his have been redesigned, or the publisher's term is actually refreshed. His cover art has been refreshed on his paperback several times, and I think it was the last time around that they decided to use the same one. And I don't know if you're familiar with them, but there's a line of T-shirts that
yes.
I don't think Harper licenses them. They're done by another company altogether. We have sold them, many of them, and they use the cover art as it comes from the dust jackets at Harper. But when I started buying Tony way back in the 70s, so I actually have, I'm happy to say, first editions of his books, not because I was any brilliant book collector, but I just liked reading them. Those were different.
Those were not Peter Thorpe.
No, they were not.
I don't know when they started.
They were not particularly eye-catching.
Thief of Time was a Peter Thorpe jacket, but I don't know if they started before that one or not.
I probably have to go back and look at them. But now, of course, they've even brought Fly on the Wall, which takes place in Washington, and his most recent book, the Southeast Asian one, Finding Moon, which has nothing to do, but they gave it the same look. Yeah. What they did was, of course, they used a Tibetan art, or you know, to give you the same, almost like a Kachina mask effect, but entirely
If you don't look, people have commented on that. If you didn't look carefully, you wouldn't realize that it wasn't in the series. And even the title, Finding Moon, has kind of a, you know, that could easily be the title.
Well, in a highly competitive marketplace, which the book marketplace is, just like any other, how the book is packaged is certainly significant.
Well, people will say, you know, I bought your book initially because I liked the jacket. Well, so I guess they are influenced by that.
I think so. There's only a very short window of time, and I think on the whole they've done a nice job for you. You have done, Judy, just quickly, because we're beginning to run out of time, you have in print a collection of short stories and poetry called Mercury Retrograde. So you have done a little writing outside mystery. Are you contemplating going back to anything like that?
Well, these were all done before I started writing the mysteries.
Oh, they were?
I started as writing poetry, and then I worked up to short stories, and then it was so hard to get a short story published, I decided it was easier to write a novel than to get a single short story published. So then I moved on to novels, but after they came out, a small publisher in California contacted me and asked me if I had any early work, and that's how that came about. But I love to write poetry, but I don't have time doing these books. Yeah.
Well, Well, it sounds as though you have a busy writing future plan.